Shabbat Shalom from the Gush, Parshas Tazria. Chazal speak about the sequencing between Parshas Shemini and Parshas Tazria Mitzara. Typically, we read Tazria Mitzara together. This year, because of the Shana Mubarak, the Ibrayar, we have the luxury of reading Tazria separately and Mitzara separately. And again, typically we read them after Pesach. This year, we read it before Pesach because of the extra month. And Chazal saw parallels between the sequencing of Shemini leading to Tazria Mitzara, and the sequencing of Parshas Bereshis. In Parshas Bereshis, animals were created first, day 5, beginning of day 6. Only subsequently, human beings were created. Human beings are the culmination, the masterpiece, the pinnacle of creation. There's a build-up from more basic and elementary elements of our world and of our universe to human beings, Tselem Elokim. Chazal speak about Hashem preparing the banquet, preparing the entire world so that human beings could prosper and utilize the resources and opportunities Hashem provided. That same sequence unfolds between Shemini and Tazria Mitzara. The end of Shemini describes the laws pertaining animals. And of course, animals don't have mitzvahs, so their laws are not laws that they have, but laws that we have, namely the laws of kosher. Ezeh tochlu, ezeh lo tochlu. Then after describing the laws of animals in Parshas Shemini, there's a segue to the halachos of human beings. And of course, it starts at the beginning, what happens when a human being is born, Isha ki Tazria, but it extends far beyond the birth of human beings. The laws pertaining Adam. So just like the Tziraso, refers Rashi in Tazria, animals preceded humans, similarly Toraso, the laws. What is the purpose of this parallelism? Just to maintain stylistic integrity? Well, just like Bereshis, just like Shmos. Part of the answer to that question is in appreciating the differences between Bereshis and Shmos, or between Bereshis and Vayikra. They're meant to be parallel stylistically because there's one major difference at the heart. After man is created in Bereshis, he falls. He fails HaKadosh Baruch Hu's expectations. Adam and Chava partake of the Eitz Hadas, and they're banished. And they're banished from Gan Eden. And they never return. And when I say they never return geographically, but also they don't return spiritually and morally. There's no tshuva. Again, we take tshuva for granted, but it is a tradition that has to be imagined and advanced and passed on to generations. So we, thank God, live in a world in which tshuva is understood. Tshuva is offered to us by Kadosh Baruch Hu. There's a very, very striking medrash in which Adam meets Cain. How they met one another. Cain seemed to already be roaming, so he may not have lived with Adam, his parents, anymore, but they meet each other after Cain murders Hevel. And Adam asks Cain, well, what was your punishment? And Cain says, well, I did tshuva, and Cain's tshuva was amateurish. It was very insolent and truculent tshuva. Gadol avonim, and so it sounds almost sarcastic and dismissive, but at least he said the word avoni. At least he uttered the word avoni. He took some degree of accountability. And Cain tells his father Adam, and half of my sentence was commuted. Presumably, Cain should have been killed for killing his brother. His sentence was commuted just to wandering the earth and struggling with nature. And Adam puts his hands in his head and says, oh my goodness, I wish I would have realized that tshuva was an option. And I would have performed tshuva for my sin, and who knows how that would have turned out, what the ending to that storyline would have been. So tshuva is not something that is understood. It's not something which is a given. It's not taken for granted in Sefer Bereshis, and that's why Adam and Chava leave, never to return. In Parshas Tazria, and to a degree in Mitzara, because Mitzara is the recovery, in Parshas Tazria and Mitzara, you have a similar situation, a similar narrative, where man has to leave primarily because he's afflicted with a disease. It may be a no-fault situation. The Torah presents it. Torah doesn't telegraph that this tzaras is because of Lashon Hara, or that this tzaras is because of arrogance, of Gasus Ruach. Just as afflicted with a disease. Of course, Chazal fill in the blanks. But he has to leave the Beis HaMikdash. He has to leave the environments of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The difference is, and that's why the two stories have to be sequenced identically in order to highlight the difference, is that the man who leaves, or the woman who leaves in Tazria Mitzara, has a method of return. V'huva l'kohen. And there's a recovery process. because thousands of years later, people have already understood that human beings are weak and fragile, whether that fragility is moral and spiritual, or that fragility is physical, as maybe in this case, again, the Torah doesn't describe a chait. And for humans to succeed, they need a recovery process to walk back into the Beis HaMikdash. So the people in Parshas Bereishis, they walk out of Gan Eden, never to return. The people described in Tazria Mitzvah have to walk out, but they walk back in. And these two sections have to be stylistically and structurally parallel, so that one difference is striking. You leave in Bereishis, never to return. You leave in Tazria Mitzvah to walk back in. And the question is, how do you walk back in? And how do you perform tshuva? And how do you recover either from a no-fault but terribly depressing and devastating experience to be stricken with saras and to be sent out of the machana, or of course, as Chazal fill in the blanks, because you were slanderous and you were libelous and because you had unlimited runaway arrogance and you were afflicted. And how do you return? So the obvious way you return is through tshuva. And even though tshuva is not mentioned explicitly in the recovery process of a Matzara, now I'm bleeding a little bit into next week's parsha of Matzara, there are many echoes of a tshuva-like process. If you look at the ceremony of tahara of the Matzara, again, the Matzara has two different ceremonies of tahara separated by a week. Once the Matzara is proven or is announced as tahara by the Kohen, they bring two birds, two identical birds. One bird is shechted and slaughtered, its blood is placed in a utensil. The other bird is dipped in with a gudas ezov and an eitz erez and a shnit tolah, so a piece of a cedar wood tree and a string, a colored string, and a stalk. And the other bird, after you dip into the blood of the dead bird, is sent free across the field. If you read this description and you read it carefully, it's hard not to notice parallels between the two birds of a Matzara and the two goats on Yom Kippur. Namely, in each case, one of the goats is sacrificed or at least killed. One of the birds is killed, and one of them, the other goat, the Sarah Lazazel, the Tzipor Chai, is sent off al Pnei Hasada, or sent off to the Midbar in the case of the Sarah Lazazel. They're each held together in the case of the Shnei Seirim while they're alive. Yom Chai, you can't just take one bird or one sar and shecht it and find another sar. You have to be mamid them, you have to position them together as a tandem. And the same thing with Shtei Tziporim Chayot. You can't kill one bird and then buy another bird. So they're a unit that has to be considered and positioned together. And then, of course, what's probably most striking is this red string. Remember, the red string for the Mitzara's bird is written in the Torah. The red string for the Sarah Lazazel is not written in the Torah, but it's described in the Mishnah Yoma, Parak Daled. They would tie a string around the red string around the horns of the sire. So that's the classic method or the classic apparatus for recovery. You perform tshuva. And when the Mitzara is undergoing this ceremony, it echoes and it resonates with Yom Kippur, and of course he is expected to perform tshuva. But there is a different ceremony which the two birds of the Mitzara evoke. And it's not the ceremony of Yom Kippur and the ceremony of tshuva. It's actually a little Pesach. It's the ceremony of the first Pesach Mitzrayim. How does the ceremony of the two birds evoke the ceremony of Pesach Mitzrayim? Well, in each case, the blood was applied or was dipped in with a reed. So the Azov of the Mitzara reminds him of the Azov being dipped in blood, the stalk or the reed being dipped in blood in Pesach Mitzrayim. And when the Mitzara had to leave for those days until he was tar, Badad Yeshev Michutz Lamachne Moshavo, he had to be sequestered and isolated. Well, he was probably thinking about what the Jews experienced the night of Mitzrayim. Atem lo tetzumi Pesach habeso ad boker. So he's meant to think not just of Yom Kippur, but he's meant to think of Pesach. Why is he meant to think of Pesach? Because part of your recovery process is to return to that seminal moment of Jewish history and of Jewish identity, and to reconnect with your original roots, to reduce all the artifice and all the corruption and all the contamination that led to this condition, that led to his moral fall, and to remind yourself of your core identity. I'm a Jew. I'm part of a larger nation of Jewish people. I'm part of a larger historical arc of the Jewish people. And I return to that seminal moment when Jewish history was born, when Jewish nation was born, and that is my reboot. And it's my reboot because it should sit at the core. Everything else I try to accomplish in this world, when I succeed or fail, is built upon that foundation. The foundation is, who am I? And I am a member of the Jewish people, tasked with a mission to represent Hashem. Sometimes I succeed in that mission, sometimes I don't, sometimes I succeed personally, sometimes I fail personally, sometimes I'm in a more secure state, sometimes I'm in a more fragile and delicate state. I return to the foundation. So that ceremony evokes two different moments for the Metzora. It's the moment of Yom Kippur, the classic penitence and tshuva, but it's also the moment of national identity. I think over the last 6 months, a lot of us have found ourselves returning to our foundational story. Who are we as a people? We lost that story. And I think because we lost that shared story, our story changed in Israel. Our story became, we're a startup nation, we're a nation of entrepreneurs, we're a nation of financially successful, we're a nation of different ethnic groups, and we forgot the foundational story. People of God, awarded the land of God, tasked with representing Hashem in this world, inciting hostility because we represent Hashem. And the last 6 months, tragically, has forced us to scrape away and peel away some of the layers of identity, both personal identity, communal identity, national identity, and return to the core identity, our people, our land, and our God. And I hope that that reductiveness and the return to our foundational story allows us to, I would say, have a sharper sense of that story, even as we build layers on top of it, because that story is foundational, and it's also the story that unifies us. As different as we are, ethnically and culturally and ideologically and religiously, that's our common story. And when that common story phrase, our unity phrase. Shabbat Shalom.